July 11, 1944. In a hedgerow ditch near Kasserine, a German grenadier cradled cold rations and dared not strike a match, because in minutes American artillery would find him. 200 meters behind him, the goulash cannon sat cold. Its iron stack had not breathed in 3 days. The last curl of smoke that rose above the hedgerow had lasted less than a minute. That was enough. Shells fell with a precision that felt personal, not a blind barrage, a cluster within 50 meters. 2 cooks lay dead beside a pot that never boiled. Since then, there was no coffee, no warmth, no light, and at night, no sleep. The American guns had no pattern anyone could read. A single round at 3:15, silence. Then 6 more at 4:40. Men closed their eyes and woke, not because a shell had landed, but because it might. How did the United States build an artillery system so fast, so accurate, and so relentless that it stripped soldiers of food, warmth, and sleep? Not with bigger guns. The American 105mm howitzer was ordinary. The 155 had range, but no miracle. German gunners who examined them shrugged. The secret was not metal, it was math. A system of calculation, communication, and coordination that worked so quickly that by the time a position was noticed, its fate was already being computed in a tent the enemy would never see. The story begins far from battle. Fort Sill, Oklahoma. The year was 1931. On a dusty range in spring heat, Major Carlos Brewer showed a handful of officers something quiet and revolutionary. For years, artillery had been aimed by each battery on its own. A commander watched his own shells, corrected his own fire, and massing guns on a single target took long minutes the enemy could steal. Brewer proposed something else. Centralize the brain. Keep the guns at their posts, but move the thinking to one place. A single tent, a single team, a single map. On that day, Brewer's team massed the fire of a full battalion onto one point, and did it in minutes. The shells landed where the tape on the map said they would land. Almost no one noticed. Budgets were thin. War was far away. But a young officer named Orlando Ward watched, and he understood. Not only a faster way to compute, a new architecture. Ward built the Fire Direction Center. Remember that idea, for it is the engine of everything that follows. A forward observer called a grid coordinate, 6 digits whispered into a radio. In the Fire Direction Center, a plotting officer opened a cabinet of pre-computed firing tapes. Strips of data for wind, temperature, barrel wear, elevation. He drew a line across a map and read the answer. No slide rule under fire, no trigonometry at the gun. From the first whisper to the first shell, 3 minutes, sometimes less. Speed made something else possible, simplicity. The grid coordinate method was so accessible that any officer could call a mission. When officers fell, sergeants called. When sergeants fell, any soldier with a radio could be walked through the steps. The German method was different. It required a trained observer to know 3 positions and compute the geometry between them. Accurate, but slow. And when that observer died, the guns went blind. By 1939, the system was standardized. The tapes, the nets, the center. But paper is not battle. The answer came in North Africa, and at first it was pain. Kasserine Pass. East of Sid Buz, the 2nd Battalion of the 17th Field Artillery faced the desert. By nightfall, its guns were German trophies. Observers were overrun in the first hour. Batteries guessed. It felt like failure. Yet even then, Rammel of the Africa Corps wrote home and noted an observation plane directing numerous batteries on all worthwhile targets across the zone. The architecture had survived its first fire. It only needed men who had been shot at. 6 weeks later, at Guettar, the lesson arrived. The forward observers were dug in on high ground. The fire direction centers had mapped the valley. When German tanks moved, the calls came in, and in 3 minutes, concentrated fire fell. The counterattack stalled, reformed, and stalled again. 30 tanks destroyed or disabled. The classroom had stepped into combat and found its purpose. Then came Italy, and with it the leap from defense to offense. At Cerno, on the morning of September 10, 1943, a forward observer only 24 years old lay in a ditch with a working radio as a counterattack rolled toward him. He spoke his own grid coordinate and asked for everything. What arrived in roughly 90 seconds was not a battery, it was a division. The mission leapt from battalion to division artillery, then to every battalion in range. Each plotting officer pulled a tape. Each gun set its charge. Dozens of shells tore the air toward a single point he had chosen with a pencil. No conference, no pause. The system made massed fire automatic. The German chain could not match that clock. Requests ran upward and down again. 10 minutes on a good day, 12 or 15 on a bad day. In a war measured in seconds, 10 minutes was an eternity. The Americans could call, land, adjust, and call again before a German observer saw his first rounds arrive. Italy revealed a deeper intent, harassment and interdiction. H and I fire, not only at known targets, but at suspected ones. Crossroads, reverse slopes, tree lines, random intervals that taught the body to fear silence as much as noise. Kitchens that needed 20 minutes to make smoke were found and struck before water boiled. Daylight roads belonged to the hobos. Night roads were searched by H&I. The men ate cold. Then they ate less. Then they did not sleep at all. Normandy gave the system something Italy never could: mass. Enough guns, enough ammunition, enough observers to run the machine without rest. On July 25th, south of St. Lo, a platoon from the 352nd Division waited in a sunken lane. They knew the rhythm of American guns. They expected a ranging shot. It never came. The first sound was everything at once. 105 millimeters, 155s. Batteries the men had never heard before, all within the same 3 seconds. This was time on target. Each battery computed its own time of flight. Each fired so that every shell arrived together. The effect struck the body before the mind could form a thought. No whistle, no warning. Only the moment before and the moment after. Above it all circled a fabric-covered airplane with 65 horsepower and a view of the world. The Piper Cub, the L-4 Grasshopper. It carried no weapons, yet wherever it circled, artillery followed. A pilot and an observer at 800 feet could see a column under trees, a mortar behind a hedge, smoke from a kitchen in a farmyard. A grid coordinate went out. 3 minutes later, the position ceased to exist. An entire regiment could freeze at the sound of that engine, not because of what it could do, but because of what it could call. Rommel saw it clearly. He called it artillery superiority. Not only weight of fire, speed and flexibility. The American division answered in 3 minutes. The German division needed 10 to 12. Those 7 minutes multiplied across thousands of missions, across weeks and months, and crushed men not with one blow, but with the certainty that no moment was safe. Prisoners said it plainly. The weapon they feared most was artillery. And still, this was not the final form. In December 1944, a new fuse reached the line under a name spelled in code: POZITT. Inside each shell was a tiny radio and a battery. In flight, the radio sensed the ground and set off the burst at a precise height, 30 to 50 feet above the surface. On the morning of December 16th, Colonel George Axelson listened as the front near Monshaw erupted. The 38th Cavalry Squadron was calling for help. The new fuse was still restricted. Authorization had not yet come. Axelson gave the order anyway. Load! Fire! The shells burst in the air. Shrapnel rained downward into foxholes and trenches that had always been safe. The last refuge became a trap. Within 48 hours, all restrictions were lifted. At Malmade, men walked out of airbursts with hands raised, shouting "Kamerad," fleeing the storm behind them. By December 23rd, American intelligence estimated 2,000 Germans killed by these rounds alone. None of the fuses were recovered. If they failed, they destroyed themselves. In the ranks, they were called a Christmas present. General Patton wrote to Washington that a battalion concentration with the new shell and its funny fuse had killed by actual count 702 men trying to cross the Sour River. He added that when all armies had this, war would have to change, and he was glad the idea had been theirs first. By January 1945, a German battalion commander had no good choices left. He could not move by day. He could not move by night along roads. He could not gather his men to brief them. He could not disperse them too widely and still fight. He could not cook without smoke. He could not sleep without fear. And with the new fuse, he could not rely on the earth itself to save him. A man in a hole was now more vulnerable than a man who ran, because the burst would find the space directly above his head. When the guns finally fell silent, the architects of the system stepped off the stage with little ceremony. Carlos Brewer had risen to brigadier general. He never commanded artillery in combat. Orlando Ward had built the Fire Direction Center. He commanded the 1st Armor Division, was relieved after Kasserine, and spent much of the war in Washington. Colonel George Axelson, who broke the seal on the fuse, was not punished. His decision became doctrine in days. The men they faced went home if they could. The 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division was rebuilt and shattered, rebuilt again with old men and boys, then shattered for the last time. The goulash cannons were cleaned and placed in museums. Their placards explain how many men they fed. They do not say that by the summer of 1944, lighting one could bring death in 3 minutes. After the war, the numbers were tallied. In the European theater, more than 9 million rounds fired between D-Day and VE Day. But the numbers were not the story. The story was an ability named by a veteran in simple words: steal on a target faster than any force in history. 3 minutes from a voice on a radio to shells on a coordinate. Any officer could call it, any center could compute it, any battery could fire it. And by the end, a fuse chose the right height without human touch. That is how an army made men afraid to eat, afraid to warm their hands, afraid to sleep. Not with a single weapon, but with a system. Born in a quiet classroom, proven in fear, refined in mud, scaled in hedgerows, perfected by a secret that fit inside a shell. A calculator that did not hate and did not forgive, only solved again and again for a grid where someone was about to die.